Hey guys, Lightning here. Just want to make a quick announcement. So this is a project I've been working on for a while that is a pilot for a potential audiobook series I'm thinking about putting on this channel. So I put together this first chapter of the book as a pilot. If you'd like to see more of this book, it's possible you could get maybe 15 likes on this video. And when we do so, within 2 days after that point, I will go ahead and post the second chapter and continue posting after that. So, 15 likes, if you can get there, yay! Anyway, have a good day and enjoy the rest of the story. Zeta, Epsilon, Rho, Omega, Code 0. It was all agreed upon ahead of time. All safety measures were set to go. It was well known what the conditions would be. The dirty lab, hidden deep underground, was lit by a single electric light bulb, which looked many years old. It occasionally flickered, changing from a mid-level of light to brightly illuminating the rusty metal walls and seeping pools of water. The mold and moss crawled over the walls. The cold metal table in the center of the room was surrounded by the cables and equipment needed to complete the upload and monitor the progress of the experiment. Alongside this was the vital life-sustaining equipment to keep the patient alive for the duration of the experiment, however long it would take. There were several computers lining the walls, monitoring various different things. The group of people slowly and solemnly filed into the room. Everyone was ready. They all knew what their jobs were. The cubes had been practiced many times before. Various smaller projects had been put in progress to test each step of the way. In theory, if everything went according to plan, it would work. If. That was the key. Everything had a limited time. There were thousands of tiny variables, places where the plan could go wrong. When everyone was in the room, they took their various places at their stations. One member split off from the group. She wore comfy clothes, unlike the stuffy uniforms or lab coats that the rest of the people were wearing. She moved over to the table and waited for the lead doctor to go through several tests with her. When the doctor was done, the test subject sat on the table. She had long known exactly what she was walking into when she signed the agreement for the plan to go forward. She knew the risks of the procedure and of the mission she was about to undertake. The small ragtag collection of scientists, technicians, and other rebels surrounded the small table, watching intently at the monitors, which slowly ticked away, tracking her vitals. Her eyes were steady as she looked around at the gathered people. She had already spoken her last words. The surrounding members' eyes shone with the light given by her last speech. They knew as well as she that whatever happened, today would go down in history, either as the greatest attempt, or as the greatest success of the rebellion. She rolled up her sleeve for the lead doctor to inject the sedative. All breaths were held as she received it without even flinching. They all knew of her fear of needles, but her show of strength was admirable. The doctor helped lay her back down on the table. She closed her eyes, at first blinking slowly, then eventually they closed for good. The slow beeping of the equipment was the only sound that permeated the room for a few minutes. It was as if everyone held their breaths in unison, and it was almost like that. The tension in the room was such that a small flame might have lit the fumes of tension in a vast explosion. Every eye was on the displays. They slowly watched as the patient's vitals descended into those that indicated the depth of the coma which was needed to perform the experiment. The first person to move was the head scientist, who upon seeing the vitals drop to the appropriate level, began attaching the electrodes. They had a limited window. Everything had to be precise. This initial movement sparked a flurry of other people to split off and begin their work. The tech wizards booted the computers and started diagnostics. Other scientists and medical professionals worked on the various other pieces of equipment. Some other rebels moved off to monitor the communications and take their positions at the various lookout locations previously assigned. Only one person stood still, watching, staring directly at the girl on the table, hoping that they weren't going to be sending her to her death. The commander was deep in thought. He wasn't sure he was ready to take on his new responsibilities. He didn't think he was worthy of taking his place at the head of the organization. For years, the previous commander had led with the vigor matched by none. They had been strong, decisive, and amazingly intelligent, but now it was down to him. Could he keep the rebellion alive in their absence? Could he run the giant network that was established before he was in charge? Would the people respect him? Could he keep straight the millions of little factors that could lead to the downfall of the rebellion? His thoughts trailed off, leaving just a general feeling of worry as he watched the scientists and technicians work. Slowly, painstakingly slowly, all of the wires were attached, all of the diagnostics were run, and all of the mechanics were brought online. Every little program had to be executed precisely, every little step run with an inhuman precision. When the last electrode was connected, the team of scientists stepped back, allowing the head scientist to inspect the final product. She adjusted a few of the electrodes, then stepped back, nodding to the commander, who paused for a second. There was still time to call off the operation and find another way. This couldn't be the only option, could it? There had to be someone else who could take the rest of the dive. But no, this had been planned years in advance, when the previous commander still reigned. The current commander looked down, remembering his predecessor's words, the plan they wove. For several minutes the room was dead silent, as all of its inhabitants were still, watching their commander, waiting for the signal. Finally, the commander steeled his nerve and raised his hand. The technician at the large computer on the right side of the operation table nodded and turned to his keyboard. He entered a rapid-fire series of passwords and pressed enter. A green loading bar appeared on his screen. All of the inhabitants watched in painstaking silence as the loading bar inched slowly towards completion. When the bar was 3/4 full, a loud alarm breached the tension-thick air. The rebel monitoring the computer with the source of the emotion rapidly stood and rushed over to the commander. As quickly as the disturbance arrived, its source was rapidly transmitted through the room. Sentries on the outer layer of the facility had been compromised. They were here. The flurry of motion which followed this announcement, however, was not one of panic, but rather of organized chaos. Every member knew exactly what their job was. Technicians shut down all processes but those necessary for the final stages of the experiment. All access data was wiped from the system. All running programs were to be buried under layer after layer of encryption. The scientists and rebels, except for a small group, all took their arms from their storage containers and left the room to attempt to delay the inevitable. Only the head scientist, lead doctor, the commander, and the technician who was monitoring the upload stood still. The bar inched closer to completion. The other technicians finished their jobs and left to defend the hideout and establish a decoy. The four remained in the room, watching, waiting. Minutes passed. Time felt sluggish. The bar continued to slide slowly toward completion. Then, they could hear it. The rumble. The sound of hundreds of thousands of vehicles converging on their location. The commander locked eyes with the remaining technician with a worried look in his eyes. The technician shook his head. Time had run out. The last 2% needed to finish the deal would not fill in time. For a moment, the commander was torn, but there was no going back. This would have to do. He gave the signal for the technician to finish the upload manually, and the head scientist and doctor to finalize the cryo settings. With a worried look, the 3 other members complied. Chances of survival plummeted. The rumbling was growing louder. 2 minutes remaining. With seconds to spare, the technician, scientist, doctor, and commander rushed from the room and sealed the door. All hope for success hinged on the program that they had built. The 4 nodded farewell and split off. All ran in different directions through the giant cave system, hoping to throw off any tracker that would be monitoring the openings that they emerged from. The sky outside the cave system was black. It was filled with ships and drones. The ground was covered by vehicles and walkers and troops. There was no escape. Their only hope was that the elaborate cave system below, and its impermeability to any kind of technological analysis, would protect the secret it held within. It had been years in the works, but the cave system had been elaborately set up with well-hidden wiring for Ethernet, water, and energy that could be only detected by one who knew where the exact pipes and channels had been carved into the surrounding rock and then recovered by a layer of plaster and pastes containing the very minerals that formed the rock. Adding a further layer of protection, the area couldn't be merely mined out because of the pockets of deadly gas in the region that could easily spread throughout and kill the citizens in nearby cities. The government couldn't merely nuke the region for similar reasons, although with the higher risk because the nuclear bombing would spread the gas more rapidly and cause it to react into a more deadly variant. Not to mention the electromagnetic signals put out by the region threw off any kind of electronic device, meaning that any kind of analysis would have to be done by ground troops. This was an extremely annoying detail, because in this time, people relied on their technology for almost anything. There were very few who had the skill to make the required differentiation on a pen and paper kind of level. This would slow the government's progress of discovering the true location of the hideout, and make it very expensive for them to be able to outsource the work. Thus, the careful choice of location was a great hindrance to the potential discovery of its secret. However, the rebels had taken a step further. They made a variety of decoy rooms and hideouts, several of which were much more elaborate than the one that the project was actually carried out in. In the final stages of the plan, all of these decoys were left vacated as though the entire project had been thrown off. But that was not all. The entire project had another layer of defense. The entire cave system was booby-trapped, such that the government would be forced to endure such a loss of personnel that it would be an annoyance to them merely for that reason alone. It was a well-thought-out plan. None could argue that. However, it was still prone to failure, for there were a plethora of internal mechanisms at play that could bring the whole project crashing down, especially with the download being manually completed.